Welcome to the special election edition of 2 Hours, where every week we get behind the headlines, break through the spin, and get into the minds of the candidates. With expert analysis and varied points of view, we get beyond all the election hype and jump straight into what's most important to you. With Mitt Romney seeming to be the inevitable Republican presidential nominee, and President Obama launching spirited attacks against Republican budget proposals, the 2012 election campaign is fully underway. With increased threats of war with Iran driving up gas prices, conflicts over government spending and on green energy, and other budgetary matters, as well as a continuing crisis over the war in Afghanistan, there remain a number of unresolved issues. Small parties like the Libertarians, Greens, and Socialists are looking to make their mark by highlighting what they feel is very little difference between the two major parties on the wars and other domestic issues. Joining us here today as we survey the election terrain, we have Mr. Kenneth Green of the American Enterprise Institute, Mr. Mohammed Owais, a political analyst, Mr. William Klein, a Democratic consultant, and Mr. Bill Redpath of the Libertarian Party. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Mr. Green, I just want to jump right in and start with you. Now, we saw this morning that we had some lower job numbers coming in this month. And we know a major part of President Obama's jobs program is promoting green energy. And we've seen that there's about 2.7 million green jobs. They have a higher median income. So is the Republican intransigence on green jobs and sort of making fun of the Soleandra situation, is that inhibiting economic growth, keeping the economy from coming back?
I don't think so. In fact, you have to look at how they estimate green jobs, because they're throwing things in there like bus drivers and trash truck drivers and other groups we would previously have considered not green jobs. And so they're inflating the number of green jobs. The reality is, and the Republicans, by the way, have not been all that intransigent. A lot of this stuff is holdover from the Bush administration. I could only wish the Republicans had been intransigent about a lot of the green jobs and green technology investments that have been essentially wasted money over the last 6 years. But instead, we're going ahead with yet more loans from the Energy Department to more companies like Solyndra, even as in Europe, countries which deployed green technologies early are pulling back from them as quickly as they possibly can and watching their companies just explode and go bankrupt one after another, because this was a house of cards. These energy reforms were never economical, and they can only be propped up for so long until they start to collapse of their own weight, which is happening now.
Well, and we see that the oil companies get about $40 billion in subsidies. I mean, what's the difference between the two?
Well, the difference is that the oil companies account for the vastly larger amount of the energy you use. If you look at it on a per unit of energy basis, so how much subsidy a company gets to move your car 10 miles, what you find is that the oil companies get very, very little, and solar and the wind and the other companies, other renewable subsidies, get much, much more. The fact of the matter is, what we're talking about subsidies today, when the Democrats say we want to remove subsidies to oil companies, they're talking about standard tax deductions that everybody gets. It's a bit like saying the home mortgage deduction is a subsidy, and we're going to only remove it for one small segment of the population, which we don't like. So we're going to take that away from left-handed people. That's what they're talking about when they're saying we're going to take away subsidies to oil companies. They're going to take away a standard business practice from the oil companies because, frankly, they don't like them very much.
Well, Mr. Owais, let me ask you this. I mean, there's a lot of money being spent, particularly, let's say, on the military budget and different things like that. I mean, is this sort of subsidy issue kind of a false issue? I mean, is there plenty of money out there? They're just looking in the wrong places?
No, they are looking for an excuse, not the wrong places. Both parties have failed the American people. But at least I think President Obama was able to slow down the hemorrhage in the economy, and we are moving, but we are not moving good and fast enough to catch up to where we were. We will never go to where we were economically during the Clinton era. It is going to.
Why is that, though?
It was not real. And especially during the Bush administration, all the money, all the wealth that was collected during the Clinton administration was stolen during the Bush administration, was stolen by Wall Street. And you talk about war. The issue, it is not war with Iran, it is Wall Street. That is where the money is being made. It is not the oil companies, it is not the oil producing countries. We produce oil here. It is Wall Street, the people who are speculating on the failure or the rise of the price of oil, who are raising the price on the pump for the American people, for the poor people of America who have to go to work. The big wealthy people, they don't have to wake up and go to work and fill a tank of gas for $100 in order to make maybe $75 for that day. It is becoming almost impossible for American people to make it in this, I call it a dogfight between the Democrats and the Republicans, who are not doing anything for the American people. They are doing a lot of things to the American people. And I think that this two-party system is becoming a liability for the American people, and we are in need of a new system, maybe a new political party, the American People's Party, call it any party. I know there is the Libertarians and other little parties, but no, we need the American People's Party that will advocate for the American people, not for the wealthy people of Wall Street and the companies and the corporations who are putting people in office in order to steal more money from the economy with regulations, legal theft. I call it the legal theft of the United States Treasury. So I think we are at a crossroads, and we will never catch up very quickly to where we were. We will never be where we were the good days of Bill Clinton and then the disaster of George Bush. And President Obama is not Moses. He's going to carry a stick and part the sea. And keep in mind that the Democratic Party, in certain instances, they stood against him, especially with the health care, at the beginning of the health care.
I will say this, and this is an open debate, so feel free to jump in. But, Mr. Klein, I really did want to go to you, because that's kind of quite a claim as a Democratic consultant. Are the Democrats, I mean, they claim in these debates that they represent the people as opposed to the Republicans and the Ryan budget. Is it true that the Democrats are doing nothing for the people of America?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think that an obstacle to any kind of political movement in this country, whether you're talking about party leadership or oil companies or the management of the economy, has to do with money and how money is being spent and where resources are being allocated. The American people are deeply aware that there's an inequity in terms of how money is spent on elections or on maintaining the economy. I do think there are deep flaws with our political system. It would be nice, I think, if there were more parties in the marketplace, but unless we switch to a parliamentary system that encourages diverse parties, I don't think that'll ever happen, except if there was a way to tackle the single biggest problem with our political system. And I'll say this as having been involved in fundraising for candidates for all my career, but the biggest problem with our system right now is money. And if it prevents libertarian parties and green parties and other parties from having access to the marketplace and access to the airwaves. And the only solution, the only political solution that ever would matter would be public financing of elections, which will never happen because the American people don't want to use their tax dollars to spend.
I'll point out the president did not use public funding for his election.
And that was not to his credit.
Well, hold on here, Mr. Redpath. I'm going to let you get in here because you represent a small party here. Go ahead,
Let me in for a second. This is and this is for you too. This is the dictatorship of democracy in the United States. They tell you democracy, but only democracy for the Democrats and the Republicans, and the rest let them die. Sorry.
Okay. I'm going to comment on several things here. Please. First of all, you brought up jobs earlier on. I think that we have a terribly impoverished political debate in this nation. We shouldn't be talking about jobs. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. Republicans and Democrats, even James Baker 20 years ago with the first Gulf War said we went there. Well, the reason we went there was basically it's about jobs. The American politicians need to stop talking about jobs and start talking about wealth creation in this society. And I know when people hear the word wealth, they think of Mitt Romney or very wealthy people. We need a society that creates wealth for everyone, not jobs. You could create jobs, you could rake leaves from one side of town to the other and then back, and you'd create jobs, but you wouldn't create any wealth. Secondly, we don't need a parliamentary system. We need proportional representation in the United States. That's the reason why that we have two dominant parties, both running for the center, trying to offend as few people as possible so they can win single-member district, single-member plurality elections. And all sorts of bad things for our democracy stem from this. in Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, state of Virginia in the United States, we had state elections last fall. We had 100 single-member district elections for the Virginia House of Delegates, the lower house in the Virginia General Assembly. And how many of those out of 100 had only one candidate on the ballot, not one challenger, one candidate? 63. 63 out of 100 had only one candidate on the ballot. That is the no-choice democracy that too many Americans have in so many races. But I will have to respectfully disagree with my friend, Mr. Klein here. Is that William? Yes, William. I will have to respectfully disagree on the issue of money. Curtis Gans, I've met several times, who was the Senator Eugene McCarthy's campaign manager in 1968 when he challenged Lyndon Johnson, sought the Democratic nomination. Curtis Gans has said that the Eugene McCarthy campaign for president in 1968 would have been dead on arrival if we had today's campaign finance rules and regulations and laws that they had then. That was financed largely by three wealthy people. It changed the course of American history. It led to Lyndon Johnson not seeking re-election, and it ultimately led to the process, I think, of getting us out of Vietnam. So I'll say this much on behalf of money and wealth. Ayn Rand once said that money is the root of all good. And by that, not greediness, mind you, but it is people trade freely in a society. Why do people trade? Because what people are receiving is worth more to them than what they are giving up. And it is those trades that create wealth in our society. And we need to encourage that. And there's a lot of bad-mouthing of money in American elections. I think at the end of the day, it's a good thing. It's a salutary effect, I think. It will bring about more information and more voices in the long run. And campaign finance restrictions, as they exist in the United States, just make it tough on minor parties and non-wealthy candidates to get traction in American politics.
I'd like to make 3 points. One is that everyone who's not getting their way when elections come up says the system is broken. That's because they're not getting their way. If they were getting their way, they would say that the system is absolutely fine. What people don't understand is that the American system was designed to be adversarial in order to make sure that change was slow and gradual and had one mass acceptance through the competition of ideas at the local level and then at the state level and finally at the federal level. The system was not designed just because someone gets angry and says, oh, I'm very angry about this, I want to revolutionize the system. The system is designed to thwart those people. And the harder you push to revolutionize, the harder the system pushes back against you. This is good. This is why we have a continuous democracy in the United States. This is why we've had the continuity we've had. It should not be easy overnight to radically revise the United States of America. No one in the world would like it if the United States was a volatile country that could be jerked around very quickly in elections. In fact, the rest of the world would get scared very, very fast if we had radical change in the United States. So we don't have the People's Party. We don't have populist demagogic parties. If you did, it wouldn't matter because they still couldn't make change. Let's not forget, the Democrats have had control of the House and the presidency the last 3 years, and they're pretending that they didn't have any power. Somehow the Republicans have thwarted them. With what? The Republicans still only control one house, one chamber, right, of the Congress. So how is it that the Republicans have thwarted them when they had a House and Senate and presidency lined up behind them? They couldn't get what they wanted, and now they still can't get what they want. And chances are good after the election, they certainly won't be able to get what they want. But all of these claims that we have a broken system, that it's this
it is
group,
very
that
broken
group,
system.
it's a perfectly functional system.
It is a very broken system. If you go back to after 2001. And the money that was stolen from the American people and the false documentation for mortgages and all the money that was swindled from the American people and the administration, the Congress, the Senate, they were sleeping at the switch and they did not implement the rules and the regulations that they were on the books. And nobody went to jail because of all that except Madoff, the guy, because he was caught with very big loot.
But the president himself said at a State of the Union speech,
doesn't mean anything.
No, the president himself said that the reason there's nobody in jail is because there weren't any laws that were broken. The government set up perverse incentives that led to a humongous housing bubble. It burst. The people who took advantage of it, yes, they were bad people, perhaps, But they weren't doing anything illegal.
But they falsified the records and they bundled all
zero
these,
evidence of that.
Well, I mean, why do you still hear it? Why do you still see it? That they bundled all these loans and they sold them to the Chinese and they sold them here, there, and everywhere.
And
many countries.
Mr. Red,
I don't buy the stolen story. I don't agree with that. I do think that there was a confluence of events. Government housing policy, the rise of debt in our society. In 1980, total debt, individuals, corporations, government, everything, total debt was 1.5 times annual gross domestic product. Today, it is 4 times annual gross domestic product. And that is the situation that it needs to be addressed. And it is a ticking financial and economic time bomb for this nation that I think needs to be addressed the sooner the better, but certainly within the next 10 to 15 years, because there's a demographic tidal wave coming. I'm in my mid-50s. I'm eligible for Medicare in 10.5 years. This country is not prepared to deal with an aging population, the demographics and economics. And believe me, I ran for federal office, U.S. House 2 years ago, and U.S. Senate in Virginia 4 years ago, and I will tell you that there is precious little appetite among the American people to face up to this problem and come up with coherent solutions to it.
But can the economy and the American people survive that long, the 10 or 15 years in the meantime? Because people owe their lives to the banks and to the Wall Street and other streets all around the world.
Who entered into those deals? They did. I mean, it's like...
you cannot blame the people. When they were going around with their salespeople, telling people it's okay if you don't have income, whatever, give me the down payment. When they get the down payment...
They didn't know. Come on. In this whole thing...
In the United States, we actually believe that people are individual agents capable of making their own rational decisions. To infantilize the people and say, oh, they didn't know. They didn't know what mortgage they were getting. They didn't know how much they were paying for their college degree in English.
Why did Bank of America pay the $10 or $11 billion penalty, and Countrywide paid penalty, and everybody paying a penalty for misleading the people and for falsifying documents? You cannot sit here and say it was the mistake of the American people. No, it is the mistake of the management of this country, and these people who were voted to protect the people. They did not do their job right, and they let the people go. America owes the 1 year of gross domestic product, and it will take us 100 years to get out of this hole if we continue to vote for the same people we are sending.
Let me bring us back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, and I'm a realist. I don't think that we'll ever really succeed in solving this problem, but I just want to lay it down as sort of a philosophical marker, as it were. Bold solutions like the 4 of us are talking about, and we each have our own important solutions that we're advocating or we think should be advocated. The point I'm trying to make is that the system is set up now against big bold solutions and big steps taken by our elected officials because of the money in politics, because they're afraid to jeopardize their re-election and antagonize their supporters and the people who give them money. And these huge steps that we're all talking about that we feel need to be taken to set this country on a better path, it just is not. The system is so stacked against it right now for that ever to happen, because Congress, I mean, just look at how healthcare unfolded. It started out with bold ideas and big sweeping solutions, and I do blame my party and the White House for incrementalizing and toning things down. I mean, Ken, you were saying that they had a majority in Congress, and they did, and they squandered their opportunity. They had this ridiculous notion that in order to get a healthcare system that was going to work, they needed to get Republican votes in the Senate, which they were never going to had a chance of getting more than a couple, and they could have used their 60-vote supermajority to get something done a lot sooner, a lot less painfully. But the Congress is not set up right now to take big steps, and it has a lot to do with our system of funding elections. I don't think we have a solution in sight, but I do think people need to be aware of it.
Well, what about the
But why
Occupy
should-
movement, though? I want to ask you that because the Occupy movement on the right, on the left rather, and the Tea Party movement on the right, it seems like these sorts of movements are saying that the two parties are too similar, and so you're saying that there's no solution. But aren't these broad mass movements of people traditionally how broad changes have been made? In
Well,
America?
I don't think the Occupy movement is as broad and as deep-seated as the Tea Party. I think the Tea Party was a response to some widespread feelings in this country, and it has a lot to do with the decrediting and devaluation of political system in general. I mean, people do not think that politics has anything to do with their lives, and people are mad at the way things have happened. Occupy was a good story for the press for a while. It's been very marginalized. It's not as effective as they would like it to be. It brought briefly into the debate some discussions about income
Will they have any effect on the
inequality.
election, though? Are you saying they're totally
I don't
marginal
think they're
now?
having any effect on the election.
The left prays that they don't have an effect on the election. In fact, I think the left's biggest prayer right now is that the Occupy people disappear entirely because, let's face it, when they were having their protests, they were defacing property, they were causing disease conditions, there were rapes and assaults at the camps. They have become a huge embarrassment to the left, and the left is praying that there will not be a summertime violent outbreak of Occupy parties because the last thing they want is to be seen as violent, destructive people. The Tea Party comes in, they have an event, they leave the place cleaner than when they got there. They practically mow the lawn for you. The Occupy movement comes in, and pretty soon you're talking about raw sewage in the streets, a violent crime.
Well, but some people would say that the Tea Party, though, was equally as provocative, carrying guns into town hall meetings and things of that nature.
These things virtually never happened. It's not even vaguely common.
And as rapes and crimes virtually never happen too. I mean, we need to back down from each side of this and not demonize either side of this.
Mr. Redpath,
Yeah, I don't think Occupy was effective. I think the Tea Party. What is amazing to me is that a majority of Tea Party people say that they don't want Social Security and Medicare touched. You've got to touch those. Those are the big elephants in the room, and Medicaid. Entitlements have to be altered in this nation. And you know, it really wouldn't take that much. This shows how out of control government spending is what I'm about to say, is that Dan Mitchell at the Cato Institute says that if we froze federal government spending for 6 years, the budget would be balanced. If we increased it by only 2% per year for a decade, after 10 years, the budget would be balanced. But simple solutions like that aren't even on the table, ultimately because you're right. I mean, Washington is sort of frozen right now.
Why is
so
that?
much
Because
government spending is sort of locked into place here. The growth of government spending, that large increases year by year are locked into the plan here in Washington.
Well, why do you think the government isn't interested if this is the solution?
Because the public does not want to accept the pain of having some of the promised benefits to themselves cut back. And they vote. Especially they vote as seniors, and the people who vote are the ones who are looking at getting the benefits. They don't want them cut. And consequently, the politicians who rely on donations from those groups and votes from those groups are not pushing what is responsible, which is when a person's abusing their credit card, you take it away. And when you're spending yourself into a disastrous debt, you cut back on your spending. But the individuals who say, I already paid in for my Social Security, I already paid in for my Medicare, I already paid in for whatever service it is, are unwilling to admit that the wealth they thought they had was not real. The wealth of the bubble, which under Clinton and Bush, was imaginary wealth. It was wealth created with very, very low interest rates and very easily available credit to people who didn't deserve it. And it's no longer there anymore. And people just won't admit that what they may have paid in
Mr. Owais, let me pose this
real.
question to you, Mr.
Okay,
Owais,
go ahead.
because, you know, we talk a lot about deficit reduction as the big thing, but what some people would say is that, well, you know, the ratings agencies are promoting this, but these are the same people who said Lehman Brothers had a AA rating, AAA rating the day before it collapsed. So should we even be focusing primarily on deficit reduction and what Wall Street and the banks say we should focus on?
Well, I mean, from Ken, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, he wants to balance the budget, whatever, and let 40 million Americans go without health insurance. Let them die. These are the foundation of America. These are the people who worked and paid taxes and paid money into the system in order to get this money when they are old. I am as old as you are. And 10 years from now, I expect the money I put in, which I think I put in more than $1 million in my lifetime, into the system. I want something in return for that. I don't want that money to go and be borrowed and IOUs, these pieces of paper they keep throwing into the treasury. No, I want my money to be there for me, and I don't want somebody like Ken's party or Ken's friends to go out and tell me it's over, we don't owe you anything. That exactly like what happened with these banks in New York. They ripped off the American people, and then the American people had to come around and bail them out. This is not fair. This is not fair for the American people, and this is racist.
So
I'm
Mr.
not saying
Redpath,
racist against black or white. This is racist against the hardworking people of America, the ones who built the system, who built America.
Mr. Redpath, very quickly.
I don't know where to start, but in any event, were you referring to Social Security? In what you just said, were you referring to Social Security?
Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Well, you have no property rights there. That's part of the problem. In Nestor v. Fleming, or Fleming v. Nestor, I think, U.S. Supreme Court ruling, those are taxes. Those are taxes. They are called contributions by proponents of the Social Security system, but they are taxes. You have no property rights in that money, and that is the big elephant in the room that has got to change and has to be discussed with Social Security. Too many people are dependent upon the decisions of 535 people up on Capitol Hill, and we need a system where there are real property rights, and that will benefit the average person whom you claim to represent.
Well, as you can see, we have a very spirited debate going on here, and we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to pick up on this topic and go into many more. Welcome back to the special edition of 2 Half Hours, a roundtable on the elections. Joining us here today, we have Mr. Kenneth Green from the American Enterprise Institute, Mr. Mohammed Owais, who is an independent analyst, Mr. William Klein, who's a Democratic Party consultant, and Mr. Bill Redpath of the Libertarian Party. We've been talking a lot about the role of money in politics, the role of Social Security, the role of spending, the nature of the political system, and we've had sort of a spirited debate going on here, gentlemen, and so I want to keep that going, but I want to come back to you, Mr. Klein, on one point that Mr. Green had raised earlier. Now, a major part of what the president has been saying, what the Democrats have been saying, is that the banks, they are certainly culpable. The realtors, various individuals involved in the housing collapse are culpable. How do you feel about that? Mr. Green was saying that people sort of have individual, they're self-actualizing. They know what's going on. It's all on them. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the president has been right to try and improve the oversight and regulation. I think that the struggles he had with the Consumer Protection Board indicate just how much resistance there is from the institutionalized interest in this country to any kind of regulation and oversight. I do think that there is a definite difference of opinion between some in the ideological spectrum who think that there should be no regulation, that the business of America is business, and what Ronald Reagan called the magic of the marketplace should be allowed to proceed unfettered. And there are others who think that there needs to be some sort of system of checks and balances that rein in excessive behavior on the part of wealthy corporations and special interests. And I do think that I lean more to that side. I've seen the consequences too many times of what happens when, and I think we're talking about Wall Street, that's a very good example of when there is no oversight. And it's certainly complicit of, the Democratic Party was just as asleep at the switch as Republicans have been, but, there has to be some sort of acceptance on the point of the governed and the government that there needs to be some sort of brake on systems to make sure that we don't have runaway trains that crash the economy.
Mr. Redpath, how do you respond to that?
At no point in the past 80 years has the United States had a laissez-faire economy. It has been a mixed economy going back at least to the early 1930s, possibly before that, but I'd say that's where it at the latest started. I think that with the housing bubble, I think that a lot of that had to do with the mandate of Freddie and Fannie, the big Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, to purchase an increasing over time percentage of mortgages that were written for people with below median income in this nation. And manias also developed, and the private sector participated in this, there's no question. But I think that was the main impetus in terms of the housing bubble, was that more over time, more and more, the loan standards face degradation in this nation. And both business and government were responsible, but it wouldn't have happened without the push from government mandating mortgages more and more go to lower income people in the United States.
Two quick points. One is, anyone who has ever seen an investing prospectus or gone to sign a contract can tell you exactly how well regulated the banking community is and the financial community is. We have extensive banking and financial regulations. We have for many, many years. The problem is that some people think planners are going to somehow be omniscient, and they're going to be able to predict in advance how events will play out and avoid having people take advantage of loopholes and or incentives that they didn't realize were there. We always close the barn door after the horses escape. Dodd-Frank and financial regulation are another case in point. These places are regulated. There's this myth that there are unregulated sectors of the economy, and there aren't. It's just that humans are complicated creatures. You can't predict how they're going to behave. And the fallacy that you can plan the economy is what had brought down controlled economies. The Soviet Union, China's ability to plan its economy is not going very well. You can't plan your economy, which means your regulations will never be perfect. In fact, you'll always be finding you're regulating after something bad happened because you didn't foresee it. If you're lucky, it wasn't your previous regulations that caused your new problem, but that's often the case too. As Bill pointed out, the housing regulations to give people with below market incomes or very insufficient incomes, very low interest rate loans on houses with almost no down payment, those regulations inflated a housing bubble of tremendous proportions. And now, of course, and while it was taken advantage of by private actors, we're not addressing the root cause of the bubble. We're now just trying to say, well, we'll regulate the private sector even more.
Well, I think, what happened here, that these bankers who were going out and selling these mortgages, knowing that their exposure to risk is only maybe a week or 2 weeks until they go to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to get the money from the government. So they knew that there is a fallback for them where they can go and get the money, sell the mortgages, bundle them, sell them to the government, sell them to these corporations, or sell them to the Chinese, knowing that these mortgages and these people who are getting these mortgages cannot, in a million years, pay back whatever they are committing themselves to. But they were pushing it on them. I was one of the people who was lucky for the bank that I am able and capable of paying back. I was able to get $1 million in less than a week from one of these banks. They gave it to me, and I was not working at that time. And I had no income on that time. They did all the paperwork. They threw it in front of me, and they brought their own lawyer, and they gave me $1 million. I am able, and I am paying back. But there are many people who are not able and capable, but they thought maybe the economy is going to continue like this, and the bank's exposure was nothing. They were exposed for a couple of weeks until they bundle the bad loans with the good loans and make it look good and cake over it and sell it. But you cannot do it by putting lipstick on
I'll tell you what, I want
to
pivot here, and I want to come back to you, Mr. Green, because I want to take a pivot here. I think we may agree to disagree on this point. But what we're seeing with gas prices going through the roof, it's a major issue. It's really affecting the presidential campaign. Some people are saying that the threats with war in Iran are what's driving up the gas prices. And I remember many, many years ago, I believe it was Donald Rumsfeld who suggested if we went into Iraq that we would be able to, deal with our oil problems. So to what degree do these various foreign policy moves really affect the price of gas and our access to oil?
Oh, goodness. I've written about this at AEI. It's www.aei.org. There's a paper up I have on gas prices, what's in them, and what we can do about them. The reality is virtually everyone agrees 75% of the gasoline price reflects the world price of oil. And the world price of oil is largely set by supply and demand considerations. While our economy is barely creeping along, other countries such as China and India are doing much better in terms of economic growth. They're putting more and more of their people into cars. Those cars use gasoline. And so the demand is growing. Supply is not growing as quickly for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest ones is that state-run or government-run oil companies are pretty notorious for not having the most state-of-the-art equipment and going for the most efficient means of production. So about 75% of your gas price is the world price of oil. The other 25% is some profit to refiners and taxes, quite a lot of taxes, really. And this is where, when you have the president go on TV and say there's nothing I can do about gas prices, he's not being honest. He could suspend the federal gas tax immediately. There are fuel requirements that require over 60 blends, individual blends of gasoline for different parts of the country based on air pollution rules. Those could be suspended, which would bring the price spikes down in areas that have unique blends that don't serve a big market. So there are things that could be done, but in terms of changing the foreign policy balance, not a lot, really.
The Europeans have been paying $4 for a gallon of gas for a long time.
Much more than that. Much more than that. Twice as much.
No, not twice as much. But still, let's meet halfway. Let's say $6 a gallon. But still, they have been paying for gas for a long time that high price. It is. We go back now to the U.S. manufacturers who build these big, huge cars. Most of the money you spend trying to pull all that, tons of steel for nothing. It's just we get used to the big cars, to the big SUVs, that we don't have a desert. We don't have enough snow to really justify having that huge big car. So we are changing. I think what I see from GM, the American manufacturers, they are changing to smaller cars, more fuel-efficient cars. But still, I still say it is not W war, it is not W Wall Street only, and it is not green. It is everything put together that is dictating to what is happening here. I think if the government really holds on regulations and on watching the Fair Trade Acts with other countries and internally, I think the price of oil in the United States will be cheaper than what it is right now. But that's not the only thing. Go to any supermarket and see the price of tomatoes, the price of meat, the price of lemon, the price of this and that. Everything is high. We have inflation. We're not talking about it, but everything is up. People cannot afford to do it, cannot afford to drive to go and get the $3 or let me say it in kilo for your audience. $6 for a kilo of tomatoes. I mean, what are you going to eat other than $6 for 1 kilo of tomatoes? You cannot eat tomatoes by themselves. So the whole thing is broken, and the United States government, the Congress and the Senate, they have to really, we don't need any new regulations. We need to enforce the regulations that are on the books, and we need to move towards modernizing the industry and the car usage of gas.
Well, to bring it back a little bit, and I want to direct this at you, Mr. Redpath, because I know the Libertarian Party has been critical of U.S. involvement in overseas. And I remember the slogan of the anti-war movement in 2003 was often "No blood for oil." So do you think that this is a motivation for U.S. actions in the Middle East?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we wouldn't be in the Middle East if it weren't for the fact that there's so much oil there. I don't think it's necessary. I think that it's counterproductive. I think it's wasteful. I think that among the budget cuts that have to be very seriously looked at are reasonably deep cuts in defense spending. Right now, at the very least, we are subsidizing the defense of our wealthy allies. That has to stop. We are spending about 48% of the entire world's defense spending. It's being spent by the United States. And now you're beginning to read articles more and more that, in fact, the greatest threat to national security is our debt. So the level of defense spending, I think, is entirely counterproductive to the actual defense of the United States and the people in it.
Mr. Rice,
well, during George Bush, it was not a defense policy. It was an offense policy. Yes, they went to Iraq and they said they are going to pay for the Iraq war using the Iraqis' oil. And they interfere in areas where there is oil. They interfered in Libya on the side of oil, not on the side of the Libyan people. And they did not interfere in Palestine, for example, because Palestine have olive oil. Syria have. Let me finish.
Well, I would point out you're mistaken. I would point out we have troops in Korea on the Korean Peninsula. It has nothing to do with oil. We went into Vietnam. It had nothing to do with oil.
Syria have olive oil. We have troops in Korea because of our conflict. It is communism. It is communism and trying to stop the spread of communism from China. It wasn't because of the Koreans. The Northern Koreans. It's mainly against China, and we will be there for, I think, hell freezes over. But I'm talking about when the Republicans, if you want to take that position, the Republicans are gunboat diplomacy, and they go after where there is money and where Dick Cheney became the president of Halliburton, and all of them are in the oil business.
And what about Bahrain? Can you say something about Bahrain? Because that's a country where many human rights advocates have been saying that, well, the United States doesn't want to intervene there. I mean, what do you think is behind that?
Behind what?
Behind the lack of intervention in Bahrain, I should say.
Well, the lack of intervention in Bahrain, we have the Fifth Fleet there for ages. And America cannot take positions in there that will jeopardize the American presence in Bahrain. So it is an American issue. It is not because of the Bahrainis, whether the Sunnis or the Shias. No, it is because we have a major naval base in there that we are dependent on, and that is why they are not doing much, but they are still continuing to ask the King of Bahrain to reform and to give his people their human rights. He's not listening, but if he does not continue, if he continues along the lines he's doing now, he is going to be sorry, because 1 million people there are of the majority who are not getting their rights respected in the country.
Sure. Well, Mr. Klein, let me go to you, because we see that there's hundreds of billions of dollars spent on defense in President Obama's new budget. Some people would say that, this is a sign that the Democrats and the Republicans aren't very different on this issue either.
Well, they're not. And in fact, Democrats have, for a long, long time, felt that they need to address what they perceive as their vulnerability in elections, that they would be labeled as being soft on defense. And you see that when Democrats run national elections, they bend over backwards to counter that perception. And this goes back. I can connect this to the point we were making earlier about gas prices. And Ken suggested that one solution would be to relax pollution controls on gas. And I don't want to pay that price. I don't think that the American people want to have dirty air and increased child asthma rates and an atmosphere that looks like China in order for them to perpetuate an access to cheap gasoline and perpetuate a 1950s era lifestyle of unlimited on the motorway. It's a great. It's just drive as much as you want with cheap gasoline. We need to accept the fact that the world is changing in a lot of contexts. One of them has to do with our access to energy and the price of energy. And the world is changing in terms of our defense posture. But again, these are big decisions that society has to make together, that people need to buy into. And they first have to agree that the political system in itself has something to say to them. One of the biggest problems we have is something else. I don't mean to keep in disagreeing with Ken, but he said something earlier. He said one of the reasons that we have the system we have now, or some of the policy we have now, is because people vote. Well, in fact, they don't vote. We have 37% turnout in national elections. I mean, that shows that voting has become, a hobby, an archaic, hobby for some people. It
actually shows that many people don't believe government is the answer to their problems, and so they don't choose to vote. There are countries where they force people to vote, and what you find is very similar schisms, because if you force any 10 people to vote, 5 will go this way, 5 will go that way, and you probably won't change your numbers very much. There are several points here. Look, I think if you were to walk out on the street and ask many Americans and say, would you like cheap gas prices and the ability to have your big car on the motorway and drive all you want to and whenever you want to and have a good time going camping with your camper van? They'd say
yes.
Absolutely yes. Anyone, and they will not believe that, and it's not true. The other point is that our air quality is so clean at this point, we could certainly relax these very fringe boutique fuel requirements that even that most experts say are no longer contributing anything to improving air quality. We can relax them. And environmentalists will never, ever find a rule that can be relaxed. Even if you've solved the problem and it's 30 years back, they will keep the rule exactly as it is. We certainly can afford to relax these rules for a couple of years to give the American public a break, let them have their summer holiday, which is overwhelmingly a driving holiday, let them be able to get back and forth from their perhaps underwater house to their job that they are desperately urgent to keep. Even the president is saying, I don't want high gas prices going into election. Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy, is backing away from his claims that, well, we need $8 gasoline like Europe has. The fact is that the Democrats on the left are in rapid retreat on gas prices. They read the polls. They look at people's reactions. They understand that Americans view the economy as going in the right way or the wrong way. Two factors dominate that decision. When the gas price is high at the pump and when the electric price is high on your bill, Americans look at it and go, this is the wrong way. This is the direction of less of everything for me. Less power, less transportation. I don't like this. And that's why that's why your people are trying to bring the price down.
Let me take you back to the question about war with Iran and the threat and the higher level of threat of war with Iran. I don't think that is a major thing for the oil prices in the world. And I think the world is positioned in a way now, even if there is a firefight with Iran, which I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, the world will be able to adapt even without the Straits of Hormuz for a couple of weeks, without the Iranian oil. And in fact, the embargo against Iran and the blockade of, not the blockade, the embargo against Iranian oil, and they're trying to put a lot of controls on Iran not to export its oil. They are testing to see how the world market, it's a pressure test for the world market to see how it will react to doing without the Iranian oil. And I think the price of oil on Wall Street and the futures and the people who are they are taking bets on the oil price, it is not going to be that much of an effect. What is happening is we have to change our way of life and our dependence on oil and the way we use oil and gas.
Well, Mr. Redpath, I want to come back to you here. I mean, there's a lot of issues on the table here, and I know you wanted to jump in, so feel free to do what you want to say. But I think, a lot of people talk about, when we talk about the military budget, and you highlighted oil, obviously, and the adventurism that's going on abroad, if you want to call it that. But I think, Afghanistan, is there a legitimate security issue? Because I think a lot of people would point to that. Well, if the United States was to pull out right away, Al-Qaeda could come back, other terrorist groups could come back, it could endanger and threaten the United States. Isn't that actually a part of why we spend so much money on the military?
I think it is, but I think that's a false premise. The figures I've heard, I think even government officials, a very small number, I've even heard, I think, a 2-digit number put out of the remaining Al-Qaeda fighters in Afghanistan. I don't know why in the world we are still in Afghanistan at this point. I think that libertarians generally supported attacking Al-Qaeda and the Taliban that harbored them in Afghanistan after 9/11. But today, I see no point in us continuing there. And the faster, I think we should exit as quickly as we can safely evacuate.
Mr. Weiss.
America went into Iraq, occupied Iraq with very high cost in Iraqi and American blood, and we left Iraq as a failed state, as a dictatorship under al-Maliki. We will leave Afghanistan with a failed state, not in Afghanistan only, and in Pakistan. Pakistan turned into a very failed state now because of our actions in that region. And Afghanistan, there is no end I can see to the war without just pulling out, cold turkey, pulling out of there. The mission was done. Taliban was, it wasn't all Taliban, because the Afghanis, most of them, they consider themselves Taliban. But the leadership and the friendship between Taliban and Al-Qaeda was destroyed. The leadership of Al-Qaeda is destroyed. At least the logistics of Al-Qaeda are gone. They cannot continue to operate from Afghanistan. They are all over the world. In fact, instead of solving problems, we created many more problems. Now look what is happening in Mali and the occupation of northern Mali by the Tuareg and the Islamists in Mali, who are also fighting against the government in Mali and the coup in Mali. So the whole thing, anywhere we go, we leave a mess. And I think America is capable of destroying its enemy from here in the United States. America can. We have the ICBM, the ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. We have cruise missiles. We have long-range bombers. And we have the drones. We can do a lot of damage without putting our boys in the front of the bullets of the AK-47s to get killed. So America should pull back and work and spend the money. Instead of spending it on the army, spend it on the American people.
Can we not spill blood in a different way? That's not the way I want to save our soldiers. I think less involvement, bring our troops home. We cannot afford it. I don't know why we still have troops in Korea, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, I believe. Why? I just
bases all over the world.
Exactly.
Romania.
It has to be completely rethought. There is plenty of room for very substantial defense spending reductions that will not harm the security of this nation one iota.
So what do you think is behind the sending of troops to Australia? Then we saw Obama just send, I think it was a few hundred soldiers there, establishing a base, saying that this is important for our now Trans-Pacific partnership to keep that safe.
You got me. I don't know. I can think of no rational reason. I don't know why there are commercials on television for the U.S. Navy saying that the U.S. Navy is a global force for good. I object to that. I'm surprised there hasn't been more commentary. I watch a lot of college basketball and see these commercials. What in the world is the United States Navy doing saying that?
I think the point is, and foreign policy is not my area. The point is, the American Navy patrols an awful lot of the world's waterways and enforces just basic aspects of law. They stop piracy. They rescue people who are in boats that have malfunctioned. They are the police force of the world's oceans, and I don't think anyone can argue that that's not the case.
But does the United States need to be that, though?
Well, that's, as I said, I'm going to leave that for our foreign policy people. My interest in these subjects comes down to whether or not there's any logic to the arguments that, well, we're in the Middle East for oil, which is nonsensical. We were there for piracy before. We were there for oil, and we're in other parts of the world that have no oil or gas. We have vital interests of various sorts. That's not my job to define. But I will debunk silliness like we're only there for oil. No, we're not only there for oil. We would be there whether there was oil or not. And even if we used no oil, it would be in our interest in not having the entire economy of Europe shut down, for example, if they couldn't get any oil. So even if we somehow had a magic fuel tomorrow that we could all put in our gas tanks that we didn't have, that was not based on oil, we would still be protecting the Straits of Hormuz, keeping the waterways open for the oil tankers to move, because the rest of the world economy would collapse, and then ours would go
Why
up.
don't we then ask the world community also to put in our defense budget and to pay for the protection of the Straits of Hormuz?
Now we may agree on that.
And the Chinese economy, the Indian economy, the European economy, it's much bigger than our economy almost now, and they are capable and they have the cash in order to pay for stopping piracy in the Indian Ocean.
There's a rare point of agreement here, which is, personally, I think if the U.S. is giving free services to other countries, we should reconsider whether or not we can continue to give away free services to other countries and have them pay. So that's my personal opinion. Again, I should say I speak for myself, not my institution, in regard to foreign policy, at least. And so, I think there's a rare point of agreement there, which is no more freebies. It seems reasonable to me.
Absolutely not. Can't afford it.
Well, I wanted to ask you a question about something you just said. I mean, you mentioned Europe shutting down. So, I mean, are sanctions on Iran sort of self-defeating? Because isn't reducing the amount of oil going to countries in Europe, I mean, isn't that something that could hurt their economy and also hurt us by affiliation?
I think something Mohammed said earlier was correct, which is there has been a lot of testing going on lately to see how the world markets would react to a shutdown of oil from Iran. And the tentative conclusions are that the world could withstand that interruption of supply for a certain time at this point. Now, prices are still going to go through the roof. There's still going to be adverse effects. But you wouldn't have a supply shortage. Of course, people misunderstand. The United States, for example, has never had a supply shortage of oil, including during the 1973 Arab oil embargo. What we had were price controls that stopped gas stations from raising the price of fuel enough to keep any of it in their tanks. And consequently, we had runs on gas stations and we had regional shortages. But oil was coming to the refineries of the United States without stop, and has ever since we started using oil in the 1940s, roughly, or actually a little earlier. But we've never had supply interruptions, and that's not a threat. The threat is the price might go up. And the question is there enough world surplus that if Iran was out of commission for a while, the world surplus, the Saudis and others, could step in and keep the price from going up so much that it was very damaging? The consensus seems to be yes. Whether that's true or not, I really don't know.
During the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, many oil tankers were attacked in the Gulf, in the Straits of Hormuz, and the price of oil did not go out through the roof. At the beginning, there was instability in the market, but the market stabilized for 8 years of attacks on tankers, on freighters. Almost every day there was an attack on a freighter or an oil tanker, and the price of oil did not go through the roof. So we have a precedent here that we will have maybe issues for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then the world community will come into patrol and control the safety and security of the Straits and the Gulf area for the oil exports. And Europe and the United States are not much dependent on that particular oil. It is mostly Japan, China, India, and some countries in that region. They are dependent on the Straits of Hormuz oil. But like I said, the pressure test now that they are doing now, it is to see how much they can do and how much control do they have without the Iranian oil. And I think the Chinese are starting to pull away from Iran in order to diversify their supply of oil in order just in case there is a fight between Israel and the Iranians or Israel and the Americans.
So to finish up, Mr. Redpath, did you want to get in on that? I thought I saw you out of the corner of my eye.
No, that's okay. I'll pass right now.
Okay, Mr. Klein.
No, I'm not a foreign policy
Mr.
scholar.
Redpath, I'm going to give you the last word here. Now, we've seen a big rise in Ron Paul. Many people say he's a libertarian. Do you see that having a positive effect on the Libertarian Party candidacy, allowing you guys to have a higher profile in this election?
To a certain extent. I think there are a lot of people who are Ron Paul people, and that does not necessarily transfer to other libertarian candidates. So there might be I hope there's a big bump, but I'm skeptical of that. And I think there might be a small bump, but I think a lot of Ron Paul's support is Ron Paul's support and not necessarily widespread libertarian support.
But you still feel good about your ability to really impact this election this year?
It's difficult. I mean, the fact is that the higher you go up in our election system, the less likely people are to vote for a third party or an independent candidate. We get higher percentages for lower offices. So I do think there is a chance. The record percentage in the past for the Libertarian Party for president was 1.06%, Ed Clark in 1980, and I do think we have a serious shot at topping that this time. But
Excellent.
beyond that, I can't predict.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. It was a really great conversation we had today. I really enjoyed it. That'll wrap things up here on the special election edition of 2 Half Hours. Once again, I want to thank Mr. Green, Mr. Oace, Mr. Klein, and Mr. Redpath for joining us here today. You've heard plenty here. Tell us what you think. Send us your comments and suggestions. Will we finally hear more about the candidates talking on foreign policy? Is any candidate going to offer us a path out of the war? Has Mitt Romney sewn up the nomination for sure? Can President Obama stay on the offensive? And can the smaller parties get a hearing from the public? Join us next week with a new panel of experts as we look into the crystal ball here on 2 Half Hours with me, Eugene Puryear from Washington, D.C. Till next time.